بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Alhamdulillah, today we began Sūrah al-Ṣaff. To take a look at Sūrah al-Ṣaff, and as Shaykh Amin usually does, he brings out few principles which will guide how we view and understand the surah, basically a few universal principles. Now, so the first universal principle that we keep in mind when we're trying to understand Surah al-Ṣaff, as Shaykh Amin mentioned, is that we must recognize our collectiveness as part of the cosmos that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. He recited the verse about the statement of Ibrahim, or of the command to the Prophet ﷺ, قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين. That say that my salah, my sacrifice, my life, my death is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Rabbul Alameen, who is the Lord of all the worlds. So since we have a connection to Rabbul Alameen, who is the Lord of all the worlds, we cannot have that connection with him if we are disassociated from Al-Alameen. So one must first consider themselves as part of Al-Alameen, as part of the cosmos, as part of the collective unit of the cosmos. Only then can a person have that connection with Rabbul Alameen. And this is what the first ayah in Surah al-Ṣaff is mentioning. سَبَّحَ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ. That whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth, all of that, this tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are a collective unit. The entire cosmos put together is a collective unit that does tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when one of us sits down and we make our dhikr, or we do our tasbih in our salah, and whatever form of dhikr that we take, we should not think of ourselves as an individual that is performing tasbih, but rather we should consider our tasbih as part of a grand and collective tasbih. So that sets the stage and the mood for the surah. So when we do this tasbih together, and you think about the tasbih of the angels, this tasbih has now when we understand our tasbih to be a collective tasbih, then the impact and the effect of that tasbih is also a collective tasbih. For example, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions about the angels, especially those that uphold the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ لِمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They make istighfar, they ask forgiveness for everyone that's on the earth. We know from other ahadith that certain angels, especially the angels that uphold the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their tasbih is they glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they state His purity. عَلَى حِلْمِكَ بَعْدَ عِلْمِكَ. Because of your tolerance after you knowing what people are doing, what the creation is doing. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the heavens are about to burst forth because of the statements of shirk. تَكَادُ السَّمَاوَاتُ يَتَفَطَّرْنَ مِنْهُ. So the cosmos collectively feels upset at shirk. And the cosmos collectively does tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to state His purity from shirk. So as there are people that disassociate themselves by committing shirk and associating partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are disassociated from the collective order of the cosmos, the cosmos in return does the collective tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to state His purity, and they feel upset. The skies feel upset, the earth feels upset, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Maryam, وَتَنْشَقُّ الْأَرْضُ وَتَخِرُّ الْجِبَالُ هَدًّا أَنْ دَعَوْا لِلرَّحْمَنِ وَلَدًا. That because people say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken a child, the mountains, they want to split asunder, the ground, the earth wants to split open. تَكَادُ السَّمَاوَاتُ يَتَفَطَّرْنَ مِنْهُ. The skies want to split open. They collectively feel upset, and they collectively do tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to state His purity, and they state His purity and His tolerance in regards to their statements and actions. So when we are now part of this collective order and collective cosmos, our tasbih is not an individual tasbih, it is part of the collective cosmos. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. That why do you do that? Why do you say that which you do not do? And Shaykh Amin, he mentioned the sababun nuzul over here, that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were discussing amongst themselves that what is the best of actions. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent down the next ayah, that the best action is those that fight for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as in rows, as if they are a collective, they are a building that supports, that each brick of the building supports itself, right? Supports the whole building. So when this was then revealed, some of them backed down. They first asked, what is the best of actions? And then when it was told that you have to, sacrifice your life, then some of them stepped back. Right? So this is the reference to لِمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say things that you don't do? كَبُرَ مَقْتًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. It is very despicable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is something that is abhorred by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have this level of hypocrisy. Why? Because that creates dissension within the ranks of the believers, and a weakness in one brick leads to weakness in the entire building. So as an ummah, you can take it at the very contextual level of this surah, at one sense, that when you asked that we wish we were be given the permission to fight for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know at one time retaliation in no way was allowed. And then when the hukum and the permission to fight for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came down, and now you have people that are backing away and backing down, that creates dissension within the ranks, and that creates weakness in the collective unit. So the principle that we take out from here is that one cannot view themselves as an individual. That, okay, this does not suit my individual need, or does not suit what I individually want. Okay? A person may feel entitled to do that because this is not what I want. But the surah is asking us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves for the believers to think as a collective unit and not as an individual unit. So number one, it is a form of hypocrisy. Number two, it is a form of hypocrisy because you're claiming that I am part of this unit. And number two, when one individual does not play their part, their collective part, then this leads to the weakening of the entire ummah. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions those that fight as rows. Right? So now something that the Mufassirun, they mention over here, okay, is that even if you look at the contextual discussion of being in an army, you'll notice that the army is not always in a row. Right? You might have one battalion that's leading the attack. You might have another battalion that's in the back. You might have a flank. You might have a side. So what does it mean that they're fighting in rows? What it means is that their methodology and in principle they're following the same strategy. Even though in part of this collective unit, you might have certain individuals that are stepping out of the line. They are on the forefront. You might have some that are on the side. You might have some that are on the back. But what makes them a collective unit, what makes them a row, which makes them a building, is that all of them are part of a collective strategy. Okay? This is what Sheikh Amin, he mentioned, that the actions of the ummah should be coordinated. Okay? And part of that coordination of how we bring it into our own lives, okay, is number one, as Sheikh Amin mentioned, that this is a philosophical and this is an intellectual transformation. That transformation starts with our own way of thinking regarding our own acts of worship. That a person should not think of their actions, even though they may be individual actions, whether a person's praying in jama'ah, together in congregation, or a person's praying themselves. A person is going for hajj, going for umrah. Right? That may be an individual action, even though one could argue that all of these are things that are done together. Right? You do hajj together, you do umrah together. You're part of a group. But even your own individual umrah, you think of that as the collective ibadah of the ummah. Right? So when every individual of the ummah starts thinking of their ibadah as part of a collective unit of ibadah, as a collective representation of the ummah in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is now step one towards unity. Okay? Where we stop thinking of ourselves as mere individuals, but we think of ourselves as part of a collective unit. One thing that Sheikh Amin mentioned was that one application of that would be that when a person wakes up for tahajjud, their dua should include the ummah. So if a person wakes up for tahajjud and only makes dua for themselves, that is a sign that a person is not thinking of their ibadah as part of a collective unit. But when a person includes the entire ummah in their dua, this is a sign that now the person is thinking of their ibadah, not that the ibadah belongs to themselves, but this is the ibadah that belongs to the entire ummah. Okay? And you want to share the benefits and the spiritual ta'athurat and the spiritual effects of this worship with the entire ummah. Okay? Another application of this collective unity of the ummah, the coordination of the movements of the ummah, coordination in the efforts of the ummah, is what Sheikh Amin mentioned, is that you sincerely want good for everyone that is doing anything for Islam with sincerity and according to the Sunnah. Okay, those are the two conditions. If someone is doing something sincerely for Islam and their methodology is the methodology of the Sunnah, then we don't tell that person, don't do this, do that. We tell that person, what you're doing is wonderful, great, mashallah, encourage. Unfortunately, what we see many times is that we as individuals might become very attached to a certain form of khidmah for the ummah. And when we become attached to a certain form of service to the ummah, or even a certain type of ibadah, then in our minds we begin thinking that this is the only way to serve the ummah, and this is the only way to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For sure, there are ways, there is a hierarchy in the type of service that a person can serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. There's no denying that. Okay? However, what is discouraged is that a person looks at someone that is doing something for the sake of the deen and says, instead of doing this, you should do that. Why? Because we need a coordinated strategy. And in a coordinated strategy, all the boxes have to be checked. Just imagine an army. If you have everyone that's just attacking, right, or everyone is only moving forward, there's no one in the back, there's no one in the sides, right? There's no one in command central strategizing. There's no system of intelligence. Right? There's no agency of gathering intelligence. Right? That's a failed that's a failed campaign. Okay? So just like that, the ummah needs people who are going to do ibadah, who are going to do i'tikaf, who are going to do umrah, who are going to do hajj, who are going to pray tahajjud. Just like that, the ummah also needs people that are going to go to areas where medical care is required, and they will take off time to go and treat those that are injured and treat those that are sick. The ummah also needs those that are going to go set up camps and refugee camps, and they're going to feed the poor. The ummah also needs people that are going to represent the interest of the ummah at a political stage. The ummah also needs those people who are going to make it their job and their mission and their career to do the da'wah of Islam and to call non-Muslims towards Islam. The ummah also needs people who are going to work internally within the ummah towards rectifying the spiritual state of the ummah. Each one of these efforts has a function. The ummah also requires people that are going to make it their job and their career to educate the ummah in regards to their deen. All of these are required. So when someone is doing something sincerely for the sake of Islam, and obviously we cannot tell if something is sincere. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows sincerity, that's within the hearts. Now, if they're doing it according to the sunnah, they're not breaking any of the principles of Islam, then all we have for that person is love. We genuinely love what that person is doing. We encourage them, and whichever way or form we could assist them, we assist them. So this is, right, fi sabilihi saffan, that we are all working for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are all in one saf, we are all in one row. We don't put each other down. Right? We don't say, well, what you're doing is not important. What I'm doing is important. What you're doing is not important. You should stop. Right? That is sabotaging the collective effort of the ummah. Now, as Sheikh Amin usually does, he will tie this in, and this is also what we see in the Quran, that our actions are based on a haqiqah. Right? It's based on a theological reality. Okay? This paradigm of collectiveness within the ummah is epitomized in which theological reality? It is in the reality of Ashabul Jannah. They're the people of Jannah, the companions of Jannah. Okay? We will be in Jannah together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes إِخْوَانًا عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ. That we will be in Jannah as brothers, facing each other, not turning away from each other. وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّنْ غِلٍّ. Whatever rancor and hate that was there within the hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes it. Okay? So our job, as we've mentioned before, is that the tashri' is the representation of the takween. Okay? So in takween, you have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created Jannah as a place where there is no rancor, there is no dissension amongst the ranks of the people of Jannah. They are one unit. Therefore, in this dunya, the Sharia mandates that we say Assalamu alaikum to each other, just like we will say salam to each other in Jannah. And the Sharia mandates that animosity amongst believers is something that is impermissible. So we must have love towards each other in this world, because that is the reality that is there in Jannah, which we must represent on this earth. Those that represent this reality in dunya, then they will enjoy the blessings of Jannah together, inshaAllah, okay, in Akhirah. That's why in this beautiful hadith with the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions how the believers will see Jannah is لا تضامون في رؤيته. That you will all see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together. And that beautiful gathering in Jannah, inshallah, we will all be there and we will get to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together. No one will be blocking the view of anyone else. The Prophet ﷺ was sitting with the Sahaba radiallahu anhum on a night where it was the full moon. He says, do you observe how all of you are seeing the moon, witnessing the moon together? Right? And we're all seeing it without anyone blocking. You don't have to fight with each other to be able to see the moon. You can sit here and you can see the moon. Just like that, you'll be together in Jannah and you will look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And you won't have to fight each other. You'll be there together. Right? So this is the divine reality in which our collectiveness as the ummah in this dunya is rooted. Right? That we have to be connected and united in this dunya because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make us united in Jannah. So if you want to be part of Ashabul Jannah, then you have to be, there has to be suhbah, there has to be companionship. Okay? That's why whenever we think as a community or we are functioning as part of a community and we think about a strategy, that strategy must be one that gives preference to the community over the individual. Okay? The last thing over here is, Sheikh Hamid repeated it a couple times, that we're talking about unity. There's a difference between uniformity and unity. Okay? So, when we think about unity, it doesn't mean that, there's no such, that means everyone has to do the same thing. Okay? That's actually counterproductive. And that's counterproductive to unity. Okay? Because unity means we're working together towards one goal. So if we're working together towards one goal, now that goal needs to be addressed from different angles. And if everyone is approaching the same goal from one direction, then the other angles that it needs to be approached from is not being fulfilled, and the goal will not be reached. And that's what we were talking about. The ummah, there's always going to be people in the ummah. There are going to be some people in the ummah that are engaged in jihad. There are going to be some people in the ummah that are going to be engaged in teaching. There are going to be some people that are going to be engaged in calling people towards Islam. So this is where we don't require uniformity. Right? There is room for creativity in our expression of our Islam, as long as we are united in our aqidah, in our theology, we are united in our methodology, that being the Sunnah. If we are united on these fronts, then we don't need to be uniform, and now we are working together as a collective unit for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to reflect over these verses and take benefit from them. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.